She showed what she was supposedly remorse for, but it wasn't true. She can cry all the tears she wants, but she deserves what she got. It's going to bring me a little bit of peace, but it's going to take some time for what she's done and what my brother has done.
The boy was lying still, unnaturally quiet for someone so young. His frame, frail and motionless, barely made an imprint on the floor. Eyes that once lit up at the mention of Pokemon and space shuttles now seemed distant and empty. First responders said the room felt cold in a way they couldn't explain, not because of the temperature, but because of the absence of life. And yet, this wasn't some hidden shelter overseas. This was a modest family home in a peaceful Utah neighborhood. He hadn't been missing. There were no urgent press briefings, no flashing alerts. He was there the entire time, right inside the house, hidden just beyond the reach of those who might have helped, while the world outside went on, unaware. When the truth finally surfaced, it was almost unimaginable, not just because of what had happened, but because of how many chances there were to intervene. Teachers noticed. Neighbors suspected. Reports were filed. And yet, every concern echoed into a silence that never responded. This is not a story about a child who simply got lost in the system. It's about a boy who was seen repeatedly and still left in danger. And what's even more chilling? Those responsible weren't strangers. They were familiar faces, smiling in public, clocking into jobs, waving to neighbors. Behind closed doors, a very different reality unfolded, one that no one imagined or perhaps chose not to. In the months that followed, the courtroom would unearth a family dynamic so fractured it defied belief. Legal documents and testimonies painted a picture of control, manipulation, and prolonged silence, a picture that, once fully revealed, stunned an entire community. This case may be difficult to hear, not because of sensationalism, but because it highlights how silence can be just as damaging as action, and how warning signs, when ignored, can lead to consequences that can never be undone. If you're new here, we cover real cases that deserve attention, especially those the system tried to forget. Please subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. To our loyal subscribers, your likes, shares, and heartfelt comments help give voice to these stories. We are deeply grateful. Now, let's begin the story of Gavin Peterson. Gavin Peterson was born on January 15, 2012, in Ogden, Utah. From his earliest years, he stood out for his gentle nature and inquisitive mind. Those who knew him described him as joyful and endlessly curious. He had a fascination with science, especially space, and could often be found talking about rockets, stars, and planets. He loved to learn. His favorite color was blue, and like many boys his age, he was passionate about Pokemon and video games. But Gavin wasn't just bright, he was kind. He had a quiet way of making people feel at ease. Teachers later remembered how eager he was to help his classmates. At home, he had a natural sensitivity to the emotions of those around him. Gavin was the youngest of 3 siblings. His older brother Tyler had unique needs due to developmental challenges, and his sister Melanie often stepped in as a nurturing presence to both of her younger brothers. There was a closeness among them, built during their early years when they all lived under one roof with their mother and father. His parents, Melanie and Shane Peterson, began encountering serious challenges during Gavin's early years. In 2014, when Gavin was just 2 years old, a situation prompted law enforcement to conduct a welfare check at the family home. Officers noted that Gavin had been found outside without supervision, which raised immediate concerns. A further review of the home revealed conditions that were considered inappropriate for young children, prompting involvement from state authorities. The findings led the court to take protective action. All three children, Gavin, his older sister Melanie, and his brother Tyler, were placed in the care of other family members while an official case was opened. Melanie was issued a plan by the court, which included completing parenting courses, undergoing assessments, and participating in support programs designed to improve the stability of her household. To her credit, Melanie complied. She enrolled in every class, met with the necessary professionals, and completed her obligations without delay. Reports show she maintained consistent contact with her caseworker and worked actively toward meeting the expectations outlined by the court. However, reunification decisions can be slow-moving, especially when multiple agencies are involved. Despite her efforts, the timeline to regain custody continued to stretch. By the time her case reached a point where custody could be reconsidered, circumstances had shifted. The children had transitioned into the care of their father, Shane, and during this period, Shane had entered a new relationship. His partner, 𝐬𝐿 gradually became a central figure in the home. 𝐬𝐿 presence was, at first, unremarkable. She moved into the family's life quietly, offering support and appearing committed to the responsibilities that came with caring for three children. Gavin was only 3 when Nicole became a regular part of his world. What followed over the years would not be marked by dramatic events visible to the outside, but by gradual changes that would later be revealed through testimony, records, and lived experience. When 𝐬𝐿 entered the Peterson household, she did so without drawing attention. There were no visible signs of tension, no major disruptions. On the surface, she appeared to be taking on a step-parent role in a household, adjusting to new custody dynamics. But over time, her role expanded, quietly at first. Then, with growing intensity, Nicole gradually became the primary authority figure in the home. What began as helping with routines and responsibilities soon evolved into firm control over the children's daily lives. Within a year, she was overseeing school schedules, setting house rules, and managing how the children interacted with others, including their mother. Melanie, the eldest sibling, became the focus of increasing restrictions. As she grew into adolescence, she questioned Nicole's growing authority. In response, Nicole intensified supervision. Melanie later shared with investigators that rules became more rigid. Access to personal items was limited, and communication with her biological mother was closely monitored. Surveillance systems were installed in multiple rooms. Every move within the home was carefully tracked. Tyler, the middle child, received noticeably different treatment. Nicole appeared to favor him, offering extra privileges and easing restrictions. According to statements made later in the case, Tyler was subtly encouraged to monitor his siblings and report their behavior. Over time, this approach widened the emotional gap between the children and increased their reliance on Nicole's approval. By 2019, Nicole's influence was deeply embedded. She began managing household routines to the point where even simple activities like mealtimes, phone use, and attending regular school functions became heavily controlled. Around this time, Melanie, the children's mother, began raising concerns. During scheduled visits, she observed changes in Gavin's demeanor and overall well-being. In February 2020, she captured photographs to support her concerns and submitted them to the Division of Child and Family Services. Rather than launch a formal inquiry into the environment Gavin and his siblings were living in, the agency suspended Melanie's visitation rights. Records later revealed that Nicole had filed a counterclaim stating that Melanie's concerns were baseless. DCFS responded by putting visitation on hold pending further review. That review never came. By the close of 2020, both Milani and Melanie were effectively removed from Gavin's life. Milani, his older sister, had long been one of his strongest sources of comfort, but over time, her relationship with Nicole grew increasingly strained. What began as quiet tension escalated into a pattern of control that left Milani isolated. As the situation became more restrictive, Milani made the decision to leave, hoping to reconnect with her mother and find stability elsewhere. That decision led to a serious turning point in mid-2019. Following an attempt to leave the home without permission, Milani faced consequences that drastically altered her daily life. She was no longer allowed to attend school and became increasingly cut off from outside contact. According to her later statements, she felt unable to express what she was experiencing, and attempts to reach out went unanswered. The defining moment came during Memorial Day weekend in 2019. Milani had been asked to complete yard work, something she was accustomed to doing. While using a lawnmower, she accidentally broke a sprinkler. Nicole was reportedly asleep at the time, but Peterson, their father, witnessed the incident. Milani anticipated a lecture or a trip to replace the part. Instead, Shane instructed her to get into the car. They drove in silence. Instead of going to a store, Shane brought her directly to her mother's residence. Without offering a reason, he dropped her off and left. Melanie later described the moment as jarring. Milani's appearance had changed, and her energy was noticeably different. She opened up about the difficulties she had faced in the home, and her mother immediately contacted authorities. A report was filed with the Weber County Sheriff's Office. The Department of Child and Family Services was also notified following the holiday. Although Milani was now living with her mother, no formal intervention followed. Despite multiple reports and repeated attempts to escalate the matter, no substantial review was conducted. Milani remained in her mother's care from that point forward. Gavin, however, stayed behind. The bond he shared with his sister, one built through years of shared experiences and mutual support, was severed. With Milani and Melanie now outside the picture, those closest to Gavin were no longer present in his daily life. And inside the home, the environment continued on, with fewer eyes watching and even fewer willing to question what was happening. In the final months, Gavin was seen outside the home. Quiet signs of concern began to emerge. These weren't dramatic events or high-profile alerts. They were subtle observations, noticed only by those who were paying close attention. And in the places Gavin still had limited interaction with the world, those quiet concerns started to surface. During the 2022-2023 school year, Gavin's teachers began to see small but noticeable changes. He was always a quiet child, but now his energy had faded. His attendance became irregular. He appeared more withdrawn, and staff began to notice shifts in his mood and physical presence. These weren't accusations, just concerns, unspoken but shared. Inside the school cafeteria, one worker named Jan became quietly watchful. She noticed Gavin's habit of standing near the trash bins after lunch. At first, it seemed like a child stalling or throwing something away. But after watching this happen more than once, John began to realize that he wasn't loitering. He was looking for something. Discreetly, she started covering the cost of his school meals herself, topping up his lunch account so he could have consistent access without drawing attention. For a time, it was the only certainty in his school day. That changed when Nicole contacted the school. She demanded to know why Gavin had been receiving meals without her knowledge, She stated firmly that if he was to be provided lunch, she would handle the cost directly. After that phone call, Jan and the staff were instructed not to interfere, and shortly after, Gavin was removed from school altogether. In August 2023, Nicole informed the school district that Gavin would now be homeschooled. No further explanation was offered. After that, Gavin was no longer present on school rosters, and staff who had quietly watched over him had no way to reach out. He had disappeared from public view entirely. For nearly a year, there were no updates, no records, and no interactions that might have prompted an outside check-in. Gavin's world had become fully private, with no institutional oversight. Those who had once tried to help now had no way of knowing what was happening behind closed doors. In early July 2024, a text message was sent by Tyler Peterson, Gavin's older brother, to their father, Shane. The message expressed concern that Gavin wasn't acting like himself, that something seemed off, that he appeared unusually quiet and unwell. It wasn't a medical opinion, but it signaled that something had changed. The response from Shane did not result in urgent action. Within the same week, an urgent call was placed to 911 from the Peterson home. Emergency personnel responded and found Gavin in a state that required immediate medical attention. When officers arrived at the Peterson residence on July 9, 2024, they were responding to a call for medical assistance. Paramedics were already tending to Gavin, but something about the scene prompted closer attention. The environment inside the home felt unusually restrained. Details that typically align with daily life were missing, and initial explanations didn't fully line up with what police observed. Within hours, detectives from the Weber County Sheriff's Office opened a formal investigation. As they walked through the house, they found areas that seemed out of sync with what had been described. One bedroom, in particular, appeared nearly empty, lacking in comfort, personal items, or signs of normal use. The room was said to be where Gavin had been staying while feeling unwell. The initial walkthrough raised more questions than answered. Investigators expanded their search and quickly identified several disconnected surveillance cameras throughout the house. While not unusual for security purposes, the placement of these cameras raised questions. They were small motion-sensitive devices, recently removed from their locations but still operational when tested. Later, a shed in the backyard revealed where the missing equipment had been stored. Alongside the cameras were phones and memory cards that had been wiped or relocated. Investigators secured the devices and began a digital analysis. What emerged from the data was revealing. Text messages recovered from the phones included conversations between Nicole, Shane, and Tyler discussing household restrictions placed on Gavin. One message referenced limiting his access to meals as a form of discipline. Another discussed securing his bedroom door during certain hours. While these texts alone were not definitive, they indicated that Gavin's day-to-day life had been tightly regulated. Further analysis uncovered deleted files from surveillance apps, video segments that had not been fully erased. They showed extended footage of Gavin alone in a nearly bare room with minimal activity over long periods. The content lacked clear context, but the pattern of isolation was evident. These digital records became a crucial part of the investigation. During the search, officers also found a small quantity of unauthorized substances stored in the kitchen. This discovery led to additional charges unrelated to the primary case, but reinforced concerns about the overall environment. As interviews continued, inconsistencies began to surface. Nicole and Shane provided varying accounts of when Gavin last appeared ill, what he had eaten, and how long they had been monitoring his condition. Each retelling introduced new timelines, and the lack of alignment between their statements raised red flags. At the medical facility, doctors completed an initial evaluation and reported that Gavin's condition reflected a long-term health decline associated with severe nutritional deprivation. Though further analysis would follow, physicians confirmed that these issues had developed gradually, not suddenly. At the time of admission, Gavin weighed less than 60 pounds, a measurement well below the expected range for someone his age. Hospital staff with decades of clinical experience quietly noted that this level of deterioration was rarely seen in typical settings. The focus of the investigation now shifted. It was no longer just about a single incident. It had become a search for how this situation unfolded over such a long period, and why every opportunity to intervene had fallen short. The legal proceedings that followed Gavin's case unfolded over several months, drawing close attention from the public, legal community, and child advocacy professionals across Utah. The Second District Court in Ogden became the setting for a series of formal hearings that exposed decisions, failures, and a household dynamic that had largely gone unchecked for years. Shane Peterson, Gavin's father, was the first to face the court. In March 2025, he entered a plea of guilty to multiple felony charges, including an offense defined under Utah law as causing harm leading to loss of life due to prolonged neglect. As part of his plea deal, prosecutors agreed not to pursue elevated charges. On May 6th, Judge 𝐃𝐨𝐬𝐼 sentenced him to an indeterminate term of 5 years to life in the Utah State Prison. Shane declined to speak at sentencing, offering no personal explanation. Tyler Peterson, Gavin's older brother, was also charged in connection with the case. His situation, however, was addressed with additional layers of review. Tyler was evaluated by 2 court-appointed mental health professionals, both of whom determined that his decision-making and behavior were influenced by clinical factors requiring long-term care. With the agreement of the court, Tyler entered a guilty plea to reduce charges and was released under structured supervision. He was placed in the care of his mother, Melanie Peterson, with mandatory mental health treatment and ongoing monitoring. Nicole Scott, the stepmother at the center of the case, initially denied involvement, but by April 2025 she changed her plea. She appeared in court and admitted guilt to multiple felony charges, including obstruction and offenses involving the prolonged mistreatment of a dependent child. The hearing lasted less than an hour. Nicole did not offer a public statement. Prosecutors described her actions as part of an intentional pattern of controlling behavior. During sentencing, Judge 𝐟𝐸𝐼 addressed Nicole directly. Her statement was pointed and measured. She referred to Nicole as the primary force behind Gavin's prolonged suffering, drawing a sharp comparison to conditions historically associated with extreme deprivation and control. The courtroom remained silent as the judge made clear that this was not a case rooted in poverty or misunderstanding. It was a deliberate breakdown of responsibility. The most emotional moment came when Melanie Peterson took the stand. In her victim impact statement, Melanie spoke about the bond she shared with her younger brother. Her words were calm but deeply personal.
Manipulated me into hating my mom. She called me names every day. At that time, I was mostly focused on surviving. They would starve me until I was really skinny.
She described the helplessness she felt after being separated from Gavin and the weight of knowing she couldn't return to help him. Her voice did not waver, but the pain in her testimony was unmistakable. Her statement left a lasting impact on those present. The prosecution emphasized the long timeline of missed opportunities, reports filed, warnings raised, visits requested but not acted upon. The defense acknowledged the facts presented and asked the court to weigh the circumstances surrounding each defendant's mental and emotional condition. But the evidence was clear, and the court had no difficulty reaching a resolution. By the end of the spring term, all 3 individuals charged in connection with Gavin's case had entered guilty pleas. Legal accountability had been delivered, but the full impact of what happened in that home extended far beyond the courtroom. For those who lived it and those who had only just begun to understand the scope, the reckoning had only begun. In the aftermath of the courtroom proceedings, a deeper examination revealed another layer of accountability, this time within the systems designed to protect children. Gavin's case wasn't hidden. It was documented. He had been the subject of multiple official reports at least 7 separate times, filed with Utah's Division of Child and Family Services. These reports came from school staff, extended family, and others who had observed changes or voiced concern, but time and again the response was limited. Cases were closed without follow-up or marked unsubstantiated, leaving no further obligation for investigation. Educators saw the signs. Gavin's behavior shifted, his presence at school grew inconsistent, and staff noted a decline in his participation and well-being. But procedural boundaries prevented them from taking direct action. Without a visible injury or clear disclosure, they had no grounds to demand deeper review. When Gavin was formally withdrawn from school in August 2023, oversight ended altogether. Utah's homeschooling laws do not require in-person check-ins or educational monitoring unless specific red flags are triggered. In Gavin's case, no such flags were officially recorded, despite a growing history of concern. For DCFS workers, the legal threshold for home visits remained high. Without a new complaint or clear evidence of immediate danger, there were no tools in place to override parental authority, even when older reports suggested patterns of concern. Meanwhile, Melanie Peterson continued to pursue legal avenues. She filed motions, submitted appeals, and contacted agencies directly. But with limited access to current records and no custody rights at that stage, her influence was legally constrained. As the timeline became public, so did a devastating question. How could a child be mentioned this many times in official records by different people in different settings and still go unseen when it mattered most? July 19, 2024, a quiet vigil was held outside the Peterson home. Community members gathered under the evening sky, some holding candles, others bringing handwritten signs and photographs. Many had never met Gavin, but they were there for a reason. Teachers, neighbors, school cafeteria workers all stood together, marking a moment that had changed their town. The local response soon reached the state level. Utah Representative Christine Watkins introduced House Bill 83 legislation aimed at expanding DCFS authority. The bill proposed allowing the agency to seek emergency court orders for wellness checks when repeated reports went unresolved. It was designed to give frontline workers a path forward in cases that fell into procedural limbo. Despite strong support from child welfare advocates and educators, the bill stalled in committee in January 2025. Lawmakers raised concerns about due process rights and agency resources. For many following the case, it felt like another door had quietly closed. In the wake of the decision, the director of DCFS issued a public statement promising to reassess internal response protocols and explore alternative solutions. Media outlets across the country covered the case, and Gavin's name became tied to a broader conversation about what visibility really means and how responsibility must extend beyond documentation. The vigil, though small in scale, symbolized something larger, a shift in awareness. A shared realization that silence, whether institutional or personal, can carry a cost. And while the legislative effort may have paused, the conversation had only begun. Gavin Peterson's story is not one of being overlooked. He was noticed, his name was spoken, concerns were raised. What failed him wasn't awareness, it was follow-through. In the end, Gavin wasn't lost in the shadows. He was failed by a system that paused when it needed to act. His case challenges common assumptions about safety. Gavin lived in a quiet neighborhood. There were no public disruptions, nothing that on the surface would prompt urgent alarm. And yet, within that routine exterior, decisions were made that slowly pushed him out of reach. Not because no one knew, but because the mechanisms designed to respond didn't move fast enough. There are key lessons here, ones that can't be ignored. Serious mistreatment can occur anywhere, even in stable-looking homes. Oversight matters. Homeschooling, while valid for many, must include appropriate checks when prior concerns exist. School staff need more authority to escalate red flags when they appear. And trust, especially in caregiving settings, must always be paired with verification. Familiar roles do not guarantee safety. If something doesn't feel right, say something. Say it early, say it again, and most importantly, follow it through. Protecting a child doesn't begin when harm is confirmed. It begins when doubt first arises. Subscribe, share, and help elevate the voices that too often go unheard. Silence may feel neutral, but in cases like this, it can be the very thing that allows harm to continue unnoticed.